Welcome back to Askewed Reviews. And throughout this week, I'm doing movies related to The Wizard of Oz in honor of the 85th anniversary of the original film. This one was also, by the way, a viewer request. So today I'm doing the 1985 film Return to Oz. Here is your trivia question for today. What are the two things Mombi keeps in Cabinet 31? The answers will be at the end of this episode. In the film Return to Oz, we head back to Kansas, where we catch back up with Dorothy Gale and, of course, her Aunt Em and Uncle Henry. Now, for some time, Dorothy has continued to talk about Oz as if it were a real place, so her aunt and uncle are worried about her and take her to an asylum to see if there's a doctor that can help her. This is where Dorothy meets Dr. Worley, who has an experimental new way of being able to help people out with this particular type of issue, which is clearly just shock treatment. Now, thankfully, before the experiment is about to begin, the power goes out due to a storm. Dorothy is then let free by another girl at the asylum. The two of them run off, but unfortunately fall into the raging river. Dorothy manages to climb aboard a wooden structure and then passes out. When she awakens, she is somewhere oddly familiar. Now, instead of the young girl being aboard this wooden structure with her, her own chicken from her farm named Bellina is there and can apparently talk. Dorothy does soon discover that she's back in the land of Oz, so she heads off to the Emerald City. But unfortunately, it's quite different now, as it's very dilapidated, and most of the citizens have been changed into statues, including some of her old friends. Dorothy tries to see if she can figure out the mystery of what's occurred, but now she has a lot more problems to deal with. Hideous creatures known as the Wheelers, a new ruler of the Emerald City known as Princess Mombi, and even someone known as the Gnome King. Luckily for her, she ends up making a few new friends along the way: a metal man known as Tick Tock, another scarecrow known as Jack Pumpkinhead, and a couch that they've affixed the head of a Gump to, known as the Gump. So, will Dorothy's new friends be able to help rescue her old friends and all the citizens of Oz? Return to Oz was never actually planned to be considered a sequel to The Wizard of Oz. In fact, the story is more based off of some of the additional books by L. Frank Baum, specifically The Marvelous Land of Oz and Ozma of Oz. Now, this did not stop the creators of the film from allowing themselves to win a Guinness World Record for the longest period between an original film and its sequel, which they did hold all the way until 2006, when there was the difference between Bambi and Bambi 2. Disney, by the way, did in fact buy the rights to the remaining books of L. Frank Baum in 1954, and they did have plans of potentially making a film sometime during the late 50s, but instead they ended up going with Babes in Toyland. Which, by the way, one of the main stars of that film is Ray Bolger, who played the Scarecrow in the original Wizard of Oz. Now, even though Disney owned the rights to quite a few of these other stories, they did have to still pay MGM some royalties, as they decided to use ruby slippers instead of the silver slippers from the book version. The director and co-writer for The Return to Oz was Walter Murch. This was also his first and only directorial film. This time around, Dorothy was played by Fairuza Balk. This was not only her feature film debut, but she actually performed all of her own stunts. In the original film, Judy Garland was 16 playing a 10-year-old. This time, Fairuza Balk was a 10-year-old playing a 10-year-old. Balk, by the way, beat out thousands of other girls who auditioned for the role of Dorothy worldwide. Some of the other actresses that could have potentially played Dorothy were Drew Barrymore, Alanis Morissette, and Juliette Lewis. One of the new additions to the cast this time around was the character of Tick-Tock. He was played by multiple people, including vocally and physically, but the most impressive was definitely Michael Sundin, who was a gymnast. He was the physical person inside the suit. In fact, he stood upside down and backwards inside Tick-Tock's body to be able to move the legs. He was also strapped down. Another new addition was Jack Pumpkinhead. Here's something interesting. Tim Burton has stated that Jack was an inspiration for his character of Jack Skellington. The voice of Jack in this film was done by Brian Henson, but they did originally try to reach out and see if they could get Dick Van Dyke. The original plan was to have the Scarecrow, Tin Man, and the Cowardly Lion have larger roles, but due to budget cuts, their appearance was reduced. Also, due to the budget cuts, the Scarecrow did not get a fully articulated animatronic head like the Gump. You may not have known this, but playing the Tin Man in this film was actor Deep Roy. Emma Ridley, who played Ozma, was dubbed in post production as they felt she was too British for the character. Walter Murch's daughter, Beatrice, was then the voice. The characters of the Gnome King and Dr. Whirly were played by Nicole Williamson, but that role almost went to Leo McKern, Christopher Lloyd, or Tim Curry. Jean Marsh plays Nurse Wilson and the original Mombi, but that role almost went to Louise Fletcher or Mary Steenburgen. Here's something I only just now realized while rewatching this film. Jean Marsh also plays Queen Bavmorda in Willow. Now, of course, I have to talk about the Wheelers. When I was a kid, I remember being creeped the F out by these things. I mean, imagine this rolling up on you. Now, there is one actor who deserves a lot of props when it comes to this film. Pons Mar. He played the lead Wheeler, but he was also an asylum orderly, the voice of the gnome messenger, and he was even the movement coach for the Scarecrow and Jack Pumpkinhead. If you weren't aware, Belina is actually a character from the book series. Now, in this film, she was played by 40 real chickens and one animatronic. At the very beginning and end of this film, there is actually a Toto, and this Toto was played by a dog named Tansy. Several of the random characters that appear in the parade and the throne room scene at the end of the film are actually characters from the Oz books. Return to Oz was actually the first film to use the Walt Disney Pictures logo with the rainbow going over the castle. The claymation done throughout the film was really fun to watch, and that's no surprise as it was done by claymation artist Will Vinton. Did you happen to notice the statue in the film that shows a lion's head on a monkey's body that has eagle's wings? This is actually a character from the Oz books called Lemon Eeg. I find it funny that I get to say this, but this Disney Wizard of Oz film has a body count, and that would be 8. 6 Wheelers that get taken out in the deadly desert, the Gnome King who ends up eating an egg, and Dr. Whirly who apparently died in a fire. This movie was entirely filmed in England. Now, one of the reasons they believe that the box office for this film was very low was due to the fact that that same summer, Cocoon, The Goonies, and Life Force all came out. But let's also realize that a lot of people came into this thinking it was going to be a Wizard of Oz sequel, and probably were not planning on it being that dark. Apparently, if this movie had succeeded, though, there were plans on turning more of Baum's other books into adaptations. Now, there was also a 1964 TV movie called Return to Oz by Rankin and Bass, but this has no relation to this film. So, when it comes to the film Return to Oz, I absolutely adore this movie. I grew up watching it over and over again because I love how dark it was. In my opinion, you could almost consider this a gateway horror movie for kids. There are definitely enough sequences I can think of to prove that. I mean, for one, let's just talk about the creepy animated face they decided to use instead of Fairuza Balk's face. Did you ever notice that on the poster? But anyway, I digress. When it comes to this film, I'm going to give it a 5 out of 5. Now, if you did enjoy this film, other movies I recommend checking out are The Neverending Story, Caravan of Courage and Ewok Adventure, Labyrinth, and The Chronicles of Narnia, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. Now it's time to answer the trivia question from the beginning of this episode. What are the 2 things Mombi keeps in Cabinet 31? Now, there does appear to be a bunch of other random things, but the 2 important things are the Powder of Life and her original head. Also, another random factoid you may or may not have noticed, but the cabinet is Cabinet 31, but that's also the number on the door that Dorothy goes into at the asylum. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Askewed Reviews. If there's a movie you'd like to see get a review, just mention it in the comments.